Okay, I think we can start. Thank you everybody for joining us. This is actually our first webinar in English, so we are very happy about it. Today we're gonna talk about COP16, the COP about biodiversity that we joined at the end of October. And it was our first COP as 3B. I personally joined, and we found it we found a very energized environment. We really appreciate being there, since there were a lot of people worrying about biodiversity. So we felt actually in a home, in a family, all together thinking about biodiversity. I'm Virginia Castellucci. I'm the head of sustainability in 3B, and we are a nature tech company that has developed so far a lot of technologies to monitor biodiversity health, biodiversity status. We actually received also a fund from the EU to develop the first biodiversity credit in our continent. We are mapping so far more than 1 million hectares with our technologies, and we spread all over the world 7,000 IoT sensors that are still monitoring pollinators and bird life. Just to give you a really brief overview about what we do, all these technologies are combined, and they finally go into a platform, which is our LMNT platform, that collects all the data and the KPIs about biodiversity. The platform is really useful because it can help companies and institutions to understand the impact, but not only, also the dependencies on biodiversity and on nature. And companies can also use the KPIs to share them with the stakeholders, but also to use them in the reporting on sustainability. So as I said before, we combine a lot of technologies, remote sensing, so a model that gives us a lot of KPIs, such as the mean species abundance, the pollinator abundance, that are calculated by using a lot of sources, but mainly images from the ESA satellite, so the European Space Agency. IoT sensors, so sensor on the field, on the ground, that can help us monitoring pollinators, birds life, and mammals. And finally, we add to these two technology also ADNA analysis to get more information about water and soil. So as I said, we participated to COP16. It was in Colombia at the end of October. And actually, it was the first COP since it was approved the Global Biodiversity Framework in Montreal at COP15. This framework is actually really helpful. It's actually the framework that has the aim to reverse the trend of biodiversity loss by 2030. I really appreciated the team of COP16 in Cali, because the team, the motto, we can say, it was Paz con la naturaleza, so peace with nature. And when we talk about peace, actually our minds always recall about the opposite of peace, which is war, which I think it's the way we treated which I think is the best word to describe our relationship so far with nature. So it's better that we make peace with nature rather than having a war with nature. So every COP actually ends with a bittersweet feeling, I can say, because some issue were solved, we can say, and some others weren't. So we can say that We have some good results. So, for example, the expansion of marine protected areas on the high seas. Of course, the recognition of the role of the indigenous people and local communities. So during COP, it was approved the inclusion of a permanent body for indigenous population within global scale decision. We still need to understand how this body is gonna operate, but still this is a very good news. And I think the best good news from Cali was the approval of the DSI mechanism, also also called the Cali Fund, which is a voluntary mechanism for pharmaceutical, cosmetic, nutraceutical sector and companies, and that invites those type of companies to contribute with at least 1% of their profit or 0.1% of turnover for the exploitation of genetic resources related to biodiversity. So since they are using, those research, the genetic sequenciation of those resources, they should, give a bit of, give back to the local communities and the indigenous people where they get these resources from. Two bad news, I would say. So unfortunately, the Global Biodiversity Framework found it wasn't a success, we can say, since very few nations put economic resources on the fund. And also the national documents on biodiversity was a bit of a problem, since only 41 countries have submitted the national plans for biodiversity protection among all the 193 nations of the UN. So this is the situation after Cali. Actually, there is a good news from last week. No, maybe 2 weeks ago, that there's going to be a COP16 bis in Rome, in Italy, in February, from the 25th to the 27th of February. So all the delegates can come to Italy and can try to, solve a bit of the question and the issue that are still pending. So we are really happy about it. So that they're gonna do it in a very short time, so in few months. So today what we're gonna do is first of all defining biodiversity materiality, understanding which are the main standards on biodiversity with Sara Comba, manager on climate and sustainability from Deloitte. Then we're gonna look at some standards and especially for the supply chain with Julia Costin, Senior Environment Methodology Analyst in EcoVadis. As a third speaker, we're going to have the Executive Director of Naturtech Collective, Gilad Goren, and with him, we're going to look at the new taxonomy framework that the Naturtech Collective has published so far. And finally, we're going to look with our sustainability specialist, Lucrezia Palma, our platform. So we're gonna make a demo, a live demo with our platform that is very useful to monitor and assess the impact and the dependencies on biodiversity. Finally, we have some like 10 minutes to Q&A. For the Q&A, if you have some question, you can start writing the question on the comments. And if you have a question that goes specifically to a speaker, just write down that you would like to, have an answer from the speaker, the exact speaker. Okay, so we are ready to start. First speaker, as I said, is going to be Sara Comba, manager in Deloitte, very focused on climate and sustainability. Thank you, Sara, for joining us. So my first question is going to be, since you, as Deloitte, were in COP16, what did you see happen and what do you see not happening in COP16 in Cali?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Virginia, and thank you, Freebie, for the invite. Very happy to be here representing Deloitte Climate and Sustainability today. So COP16 was bearing great expectations because it was, as you mentioned before, it was the first after the COP15 in 2022. It was the first since the agreement on the 20 targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So there was expectation to understand what was happening at the global level, if there was some progress, if there was not progress. So a lot of curiosity. I would say that overall, we've seen some success on natural action, but there are still some opportunities that have not been fully explored. So I'll try to go into both of those, the positive and the negative aspects of it. I'll start from the good bits. So definitely one of the most remarkable aspects is that we've seen was the fast acceleration and the push that we've noticed from the private sector. So, for example, what we've noticed is an impressive increase in the adoption of the TNFD, that is a voluntary framework at the moment. And when I say impressive, is that because starting from January in 2024 only, we've noticed a 55% increase in the adoption from companies, and that is incredible. And we're noticing that also with the requests that we're getting from our clients. So there is a growing interest, there is a growing recognition among the private sector of the importance of integrating nature-related risks and opportunities into the decision-making process, into their ERM system. So really understanding the impacts and the dependencies that nature can have on the business. The other significant development was that we've seen was the creation of a stronger and, I would say, more straightforward link with the indigenous people. Again, you mentioned that before. So indigenous communities have been for a very long time the stewards, I would say, of some of the world's most biodiverse regions. And thanks to their traditional knowledge, to their practices, they have contributed a lot in the preservation of nature and biodiversity. And so COP16 really provided them with a platform for their voices to be heard and for their contributions to be recognized. So that is something that is very interesting. And also we're seeing a bit of that development and of that involvement also in the development of the biodiversity credits. And finally, I would say the last good part was the focus on and the push that we noticed on the Target 15. Target 15 is the one that aims to ensure that by 2030, all businesses and all financial institutions assess and report on their dependencies and impacts on biodiversity, and then, of course, progressively reduce their negative impacts. And the fact that there has been a push, in particular on the implementation and monitoring aspect of this target, is fundamental, because it moves us and the business sector in general from commitments to tangible actions to measurable outcomes. There were, as I was mentioning before, also some areas where progress was, I would say, lacking. And probably one of the key issues was the lack of implementation at the national level of the biodiversity national action plans. So out of almost 200 countries, only 44 have presented biodiversity national action plans at the moment. And that is an issue. And it relates to what I was saying before, because without the national implementation, the global goals that we have set at the COP15 cannot be realized. So it's fundamental to see a push not only from the private, but also from the public sector. And the second point I would say is that there is still little consensus on the metrics that are necessary to work on nature. There is a lack of standardized metrics, and this creates confusion among those that have to measure. We were used at climate. It was easy, let's say, because we had CO2, and CO2 equivalent with nature is way more complex. And so this decreases the ability to set KPIs and to measure the progress effectively. What we've also noticed is that there is almost an excess at the moment of tech solutions that offer the possibility of calculating and setting targets and calculating the metrics. And we're seeing a sort of quote unquote cannibalization among the different solutions. And so this is definitely not something that is useful for progressing towards reaching climate goals. So definitely we need a more unified type of approach to sort of streamline the efforts and to agree and work together towards the same goal. So I would say, and I'll conclude with this, that probably, yes, so COP16 was a mix of significant progress on certain aspects, some notable gaps, and yeah, I really hope that also with the COP16 bis, we will be able to see some further progress, especially on the shortcomings that we noticed at this COP.
Thank you, Sara. So what you saw the business interest on COP, we saw it too. Actually, is the COP that in the biodiversity field has registered the highest attendance.
Yeah.
We were more than 23,000 participants, and this is really a huge step for biodiversity. About companies, since they have a huge interest on biodiversity and their interest is growing, I would like to understand more about materiality, because a lot of companies come to us wondering if biodiversity, if nature is material for their sector. And I think there is a lot of confusion about materiality. Could you give us an idea of how you usually make companies understand if for them biodiversity is material, and which kind of standard do you usually use for biodiversity and to report on biodiversity?
Yeah, well, creating knowledge and awareness on what nature and biodiversity means for a company, that is definitely the first step. Usually, Andrew Mitchell, one of the founders of the TNFD, tends to say that whenever we think of nature, we tend to think of bees and trees, and so something that is not really very bucolic, not really related to the business world, but is actually the infrastructure that keeps the business going. So it is fundamental to, first off, make our counterpart understand that, so that whenever we talk about business and biodiversity is actually what allows you to do your business as you know it. And so usually we first of all do a sort of an exercise of understanding the impacts and the dependencies. And most of the times people are not aware because we take for granted ecosystem services, for example. And so it's just, we use tools such as Anchor, very, very common tool, to make them understand the type of impacts and dependencies that they have, and also the risks and opportunities that having those impacts and those dependencies might cause to them. And the moment you start making this sort of translation between what having an impact or a dependency means in terms of risks and opportunities, so like sort of monetary terms, that really helps in creating a sort of a common language that everyone is at the table is able to understand. When it comes to the standards, as I was saying before, there's still not a really unique standard agreed, but what we tend to do is we use usually the TNFD as a sort of point of reference. CSRD is the compulsory framework that everyone has to use, but unfortunately and luckily, it is aligned with the TNFD. So usually whenever you adopt a TNFD type of approach and alignment, even if the company is not really interested in then becoming an adopter, it allows it to be aligned with the TNFD and with the CSRD and the other standards that are coming.
Okay, thank you so much. Talking about standards, we would like to invite to the stage. Sarah, don't leave us, since we are collecting question for later. So if you have a question, of course, write down the question on the comments, and if you want a specific speaker to answer, just specify it. Okay. So we can go on with Julia. Julia, she is a senior environment methodology analyst in EcoVadis, and EcoVadis is I would say a quite known standard, especially if we think about the supply chain. So you have developed your standard during time, and I think you started focusing on climate. But now also you have added so far biodiversity and nature. How are you doing it, and how do you see, biodiversity becoming more and more important for companies to report?
Thanks so much for having me. So EcoVadis was founded in 2007 by our co-CEOs Pierre-Francois Thaler and Frederic Trinel, and has grown to become, as you said, a leading provider of sustainability intelligence for supply chains. So our mission has always been to empower buyers to leverage their supply chains for resilience, positive impact, and also continuous improvement. At the heart of our intelligence suite are our ratings and scorecards, and these provide a holistic assessment of a company's sustainability performance. So back when we started a long time ago, supply chain management back then was primarily focused on risk reduction and essentially protecting a company's bottom line. Today, however, it's evolved quite a bit. So we're seeing that supply chains are recognized as a key driver of sustainability, competitiveness, and long-term resilience. And we're also seeing that procurement teams are being integrated more and more into the broader business strategy for climate action and now increasingly nature action. So over the last 17 years, we've assessed more than 130,000 companies across over 220 industries. So I work as part of the methodology team, and our responsibility is to ensure that our solutions are constantly evolving to meet the growing needs of our customers. And much of our recent focus has been on incorporating newer due diligence regulations, as well as looking at the new science on industry-specific best practices, and continuing to provide an unrivaled level of sustainability insights that can support decision-making. So where does biodiversity fit into all of this? Well, nature and biodiversity have always been integral to our ratings. Our ratings methodology encompasses 4 different themes, and the nature topic is covered under the environment theme. Within the environment theme, we also have 9 additional subtopics which address the different drivers of biodiversity loss. So we look at the direct impacts, which could be caused by land use and marine ecosystem conversion. And then we also look at the indirect impacts caused by pollution, hazardous waste and substances, water consumption, greenhouse gas emissions, and more. So when we're doing supply chain assessments, we have to consider materiality. So we have to consider the fact that each company has a unique relationship to nature. And so to reflect this, we will tailor our assessments according to the material drivers of nature loss for each industry. So it looks different for each industry. Then we have a team of over 500 analysts, which will evaluate the documentation evidence, and they'll look at how the companies are actually managing their nature impacts by looking at the core aspects of their management system. And this includes, generally speaking, their policies, their actions, and then their results. And then finally, the outcomes of these assessments are published in our company scorecard. And then we'll take the data from dozens up to hundreds of these suppliers and aggregate them into a dashboard, which gives a holistic view to the buyer. So it's quite a large undertaking, as you can imagine. And to give you an idea of the scale, we published 47,000 scorecards in 2023. So to summarize, our ratings help businesses understand and manage their critical nature and biodiversity impacts, risks, and opportunities across their supply chains. And most importantly, they empower the procurement teams themselves to drive positive change by engaging their suppliers, implementing corrective actions, and then building capacity on those nature-related issues. So one interesting trend that I want to bring up is that we're seeing nature becoming increasingly important to a lot of our customers. However, we're still seeing that most suppliers are quite immature on this topic. So to give you an example, you can have a look at the figure on the right-hand side. In 2022 and 2023, we had more companies in the highest risk sectors for biodiversity setting quantitative targets on their greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumptions than they were even setting basic qualitative commitments on biodiversity. So this is the reality right now, and this trend for me is still quite concerning. It indicates that we have quite a big mismatch between maturity levels and expectations on this topic.
Thank you for that. Since you were with us at COP16 in Cali, what did you take home? Like, what did you see there, and which are your, concern about it?
Great. Yep. Next slide. So we attended COP16 for quite a few reasons. The first one is that we wanted to strongly advocate for supply chains to be part of the solution and to do their part in contributing to the goals and targets of the GBF. Secondly, we wanted to explore the market's direction and gain insights so that we can encourage businesses to prioritize biodiversity protection alongside climate action. And then finally, we also wanted to be part of the conversations to accelerate momentum by sharing the different insights and challenges that we're seeing in our own network. And you can also check out the QR code on the slide. We've recently published some of these insights in a white paper publication on nature-based solutions. So at the start of the COP, I had one big question on my mind, which was, how can businesses prioritize nature-positive action in their supply chains without overwhelming their suppliers? Yeah. And I had three main takeaways, which are relevant for anyone working in the nature space, but also those who are working in supply chain systems. So the first is that, echoing what Sarah was saying, the nature market is going through a phase of rapid and impressive growth and volatility. So we are seeing this impressive amount of innovation, which means that businesses do have numerous tools at their disposal across a range of applications. So this is a great opportunity. However, a lot of these solutions remain highly specialized. They're often quite expensive and generally tend to be difficult to scale. So what we need here is urgent collaboration and integration, and especially integrating within existing supply chain systems or solutions so that we can drive that measurable impact across the whole value chain. So my second takeaway is that we need to, also reflecting what was previously said, we need to improve alignment in the nature space because there is significant fragmentation in the discourse, which is actually slowing down progress quite significantly. So there are a lot of opportunities out there. And as many people observed at COP16, it kind of feels like we're in the Wild West, which means that different businesses are making different choices based on their own approaches and assumptions. So there's not really, I'm not really seeing a pattern, which can make it overwhelming. And on top of that, compared to climate, nature also requires a great deal of nuance when we're talking about it. And essentially this creates a communication challenge and a marketing challenge. And that was also one of the main findings we had in our white paper, which is essentially the biodiversity bubble is real. And to a lot of companies, this topic comes across as quite nebulous and quite intimidating. So there are a lot of SMEs who are interested in engaging, but they don't know where to start and they're frustrated. And they're still trying to work out things like their Scope 3 emissions calculations. So we need to do a better job as a community to focus on alignment, using consistent and simplified language, and also just doing better campaigning so that this topic is accessible to all businesses. And coming to my final takeaway, which is that we need to prioritize capacity building. So I'm seeing a lot of companies still grappling with questions like, what's the carbon equivalent of a biodiversity metric? Or they're convinced that they have no impact on biodiversity because they're not growing crops. So companies have limited time and resources, and if we want them to prioritize nature, we need to get them on board to understand why and how. So we cannot overlook the importance of kind of giving that biodiversity crash course 101, but sharing the most practical knowledge and insights, and also using effective visualizations, because sometimes it's better to understand than explaining things in long chunks of text. So I want to close with the fact that I appreciate the work that everyone who's attending and speakers as well, that everyone's doing here. And we all have a critical role to play in the coming years. So let's continue to collaborate and share our knowledge and align our efforts so that we can mobilize all businesses to join us in this fight.
Thank you, Julia. About what you said, so the solutions, it's true that there are many solutions. I think we are in a very diverse phase, but it's actually very useful, to collaborate and to put everything in order now. And I think this is what Naturtech Collective is actually doing. They are collecting all the technologies working on nature, and they are also trying to put everything in order, and they're trying to understand, to have a common language. And for that reason, they have developed a new taxonomy. So today we are here with Gilad Goren, Executive Director of Naturtech Collective, which is an organization we are part of as a tech solution working on nature. We are super happy to be part of them. So Gilad, do you want maybe to explain what Naturtech Collective does, and then maybe going into the detail of the new taxonomy framework you have developed with many other organizations in order to develop a common language on nature?
Yeah, sure. And thanks again for inviting me. Really happy and stoked to hear about the funding you have from to create the continent's first biodiversity credit. That's amazing. So my name is Gilad Goren. I serve as executive director of the Naturtech Collective. We're a category building nonprofit. We've taken the position that nature tech as a category of technology, of economy, will be no less strong than AI and blockchain. It's our wild bet. And we believe it's true because, frankly, every corporate, every NGO, every person is significantly either impacted by or rather impacting nature. And as such, nature tech is a key unlock for moving the world's economy, our very existence, towards a more nature positive state. We all need to do it. So the TAM is, the global economy. So not that small. However, unlike AI and blockchain, there are some external constrictions and timelines that we're all trying to meet, i.e. 30-30, 30 by 30. And so as a small and emergent category at this point, we realize that there needs to be a category building nonprofit to drive things forward. And we do this first by being an industry association. So some of you from the world of climate might know IETA. Basically, our community consists of many of the leading nature tech solution providers, and also a growing crop of enterprise level NGOs like Conservation International, big corporates like OG and Drax that just signed on, and academic and scientific institutions and pure nonprofits like One Earth Foundation, the LSE. And aside from that, our focus at this stage is very much been on the private sector. The nature tech startups need buyers, often more than investors. And so our job is to help accelerate the private sector from the awareness stage and get them past the education stage as soon as possible and straight to the adoption and the action stage. So one note about COP16, which I found very reassuring, is that when we were in events in the green zone, which is where most of the private sector is at, nature tech is a known quantity. We don't have to, explain the 101 on what nature tech does. They're past that. They're like, what can nature tech do for me right now? Here's my challenge. Help us. Help me. And that's where the Nature Tech Solutions taxonomy framework that we debuted in COP16 really comes to take shape and play a role. So we called it our version 0.6. It's not even the version 1.0 yet. And it is both an exercise, a community exercise in defining who we are, and also an atlas, a way to navigate this category. And what I mean by that is there's 3 dimensions to it, and it's basically meant to address a simple question. For my challenge, I need tools X in geography Y, right? So the 3 dimensions of the taxonomy, the first one is the transitions. In other words, the solutions. So you'll see, and then you could obviously point to the QR code and download it. It's free and available to everyone else. We would love your comments as well. Whether you're talking about conservation and restoration, or the transition to regenerative ag, or moving along the lines of the nature positive economy, which is basically supply lines to the built environment, everything that's just human, or finance, right? There are buckets of solutions, and those solutions eventually they break down to to solutions more granular. They're here to address your specific challenge. The next dimension of the taxonomy is what we call the 5 M's. It's a framework that was created within the Nature Tech Collective. And the 5 M's is essentially what are the buckets of the tools themselves. So market pressures, Nature Tech that causes the companies to motivates them to actually take action. MRV, which is the mapping, the auditing, the reporting. Modeling, which is basically the sense making. You collecting the raw nature data and making sense of it, being able to disclose or act on it. Material change, which is the actual intervention. That's using bees for pollination. That is using fungi as probiotics for soil. Really great stuff. And then the last is monetization. Is how you actually make money, or how do you fund it. And the last dimension is both. It's basically a synthesis of the geographic location of where your challenge is, where the opportunity lies, and then also the planetary boundaries. So what of the planetary boundaries are being affected or need to be ameliorated? Just a quick note, and maybe like a tip for what we're going to be working on 2025. One of the reasons we actually came to this realization of needing a taxonomy is because a lot of the taxonomies out there are not nature tech focused, and also they're kind of fuzzy. What I mean by that is the SDGs looks great as an example, but it doesn't pass the LLM test. If you put it and you ask for, take Perplexity or ChatGPT, hey, what are the specific companies that fit SDG 5? You'll get a whole slew of things that don't really make sense. So we're building a machine readable taxonomy in order to eventually come up with an LLM, basically a model with a human interface that will help the private sector get to 3B as a solution, for example, immediately. We're, in a sense, trying to work ourselves out of existence. So when we don't have that sort of educational gap, that's when, as the chairman of our organization said, that's when we could go drop this and go surfing. Until then, we're here hard at work for you guys. Hope that explains a bit, Virginia.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Since you're very into the tech world, solution world, how do you think the COPs in general, not only the one on biodiversity, could become more solution oriented, I would say, so we can actually tackle problems?
So, I was in the Blue Zone. I wasn't at in Baku. We're going to be at COP30 in Brazil. I'm going to set aside policymakers for a second. That's not so much our forte. That we'd like to get more involved in that. I think what these COPs do is that they're tentpole events that just get a lot of the right people in the room. We noticed that one of the issues in our space, and one of the issues that we're trying to fix, we started experimenting with this with some closed door workshops at COP16. We're going to be doing more. We're going to have a Nature Tech Summit in March in London. We're going to do an unconference with the LSC where we'll allow the community to create, nominate, and then run their own events. One of the big challenges is that the different stakeholder groups rarely ever talk to one another. An example, the frontline, let's say a wild lab, the frontline communities of scientists do not have as much access and don't rub shoulders with, the big food and ag companies, for example, who don't really rub shoulders with the philanthropists, who don't really talk to the frontline communities, and on and on and on. And as a result, there's a lot of waste in resources because people are replicating in different spheres and don't talk to one another. There is a lot of slowness. We need a lot of the solutions already out there. We just need, number one, acceleration of the adoption, and number two, actual on-the-ground testing, and then open sourcing of that data out there. And these COPs play a unique role in that it allows people to have the actual conversations, get to know one another, humanize one another, right? And then get to work async, and then get back to that next COP or that next event and say, okay, here's what we did thus far. So that's where we see these COPs playing the most significant role in terms of adoption.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We have already a lot of solutions. We just really only need to start using them. And I agree that we don't need investors. We only need buyers and companies that are going to start, using those tech solutions that can actually really help us tackling the problems of biodiversity loss, hopefully by 2030, since we have a lot of target on it. So also, Gilad, please stay until the end so that we can answer to all the question and answer. I know that there is already a question for Julia. So now we would like to show you our platform, 3B platform, which is, I think, a great solution for biodiversity assessment and monitoring. We can assess and monitor the impact, but also the dependencies of companies through our platform. As I said before, the platform mixes up a lot of technologies, so remote sensing, IoT sensor, and ADNA, to have in a single platform all the KPIs and data about biodiversity. As Julia said before, we cannot, when we think about nature, we cannot look at a single KPI as climate change, since there are a lot of KPIs, a lot of indicators on nature. In fact, our platform, as you're going to see, collects a lot of indexes, a lot of KPIs, because nature is, biodiversity loss, it's a complex theme, a complex issue, and we need a lot of data to understand it in a more detailed way. And I also would like to cite what Sarah said before, that to tackle biodiversity problem, we need high quality nature related data. So if we know we have a problem, but the first thing to solve a problem is measuring it. Otherwise, it's very difficult to do it. So our platform is actually useful for many sectors. The agricultural sector, so the food and beverage, fashion, wellness, and pharma. So all the sectors that get their resources from fields. The energy and the infrastructure sector, that have a huge problems related to land use and ecosystem fragmentation. And finally, for production, logistics, and real estate, that get their resources from the field, but also have an impact on the land use, since they are located somewhere, they have a production, or they have a lot of logistic around the nation, for example. So main clients in those sectors, but now I'm going to leave you with my colleague Lucrezia Palma. She's a sustainability specialist in 3B. She's gonna do a demo for you from our platform. Still, if you have questions for her, we can collect them and answer to them at the end of the session.
Thank you, Virginia, and thanks to our hosts for being here today. So as Virginia said, we're gonna dive deep into the platform, 3B platform, and we're doing this with a demo. So what do we see here? We see an overview for 19 sites for a total of 26,000 acres and 34 different production processes. This is a demo, so we collected different sectors. For example, we have a mining, we have an iron production site, and so on. But what do we analyze with our platform? So first of all, we can see here the overview of impacts, dependencies, and risks. So the first one that we see is that 19 out of 19 sites have a direct impact on biodiversity, which is, of course, a very bad, let's say, score. And if we scroll down here, we can see, for example, this one, number of sites with protected areas inside, number of sites with protected areas within 10 kilometers. Why are all these indicators important? Of course, because they have an impact and, of course, a dependence of what they have around. We're not just analyzing biodiversity, we're also analyzing, for example, the hydrological risk and the sites with above average climate change, for example. If we scroll down a little bit, we can see here the impact driver and the dependencies. And we see that for all these production processes that we mentioned before, we discovered that 20 of them, they have 20 impact drivers that are very critical. And at the same time, for the dependencies, 68 of them are very critical as well. So when we see this kind of, let's say, result, where do we start? We can go down here and use this matrix to analyze the indicators that we want to see. For example, we can plot the local heating together with the hydrological risk that I mentioned before. And what do we see? We see that these three dots here have the highest impact and also the highest dependency. So, for example, this one is an airport, this one is an exhibition site, and we can start from this one to start to regenerate or to make actions in order to perform better. We can also plot, as we were saying before, we were talking about the indicators for biodiversity. Let's put this one, the MSA for the site and for the control area. And what do we see? We see different, let's say, distribution of sites. But let's see what the MSA is. So the MSA, for example, in this case, is based on land use, and it indicates how, let's say, altered the area is due to human activity. So specifically, the MSA land use is an indicator of biodiversity integrity. What does it mean? It means that if we have all these sites here that are away from the diagonal, it means they have a high impact on the control area, which is the area around. So to see it better, let's dive deep into one site, one specific one, which is an exhibition site, the one that was built for Expo in Milan. I'll put the page in English so you can follow me. And what do we see here? This is the shape of the site that we're analyzing and the control area, as I mentioned before. Let's start with the CLC field. What is that? What I'm looking at, we can see it here. It shows the distribution and classification and land covers and urban areas. We can see it for the site, so how let's say the land cover is distributed in the site, but also for the control area. And it gives us an idea of how the area around the site is composed. So what do we see? We see purple, which is the industrial or commercial units, which is predominant for this site here. But we also scroll down a little bit. Sorry for being so quick. But here we can see the land use for the E4, and we see that artificial surfaces is predominant for both site and both control area. This is important for fragmentation of habitats. As I was saying before, it means we have urbanized this area a lot. So you can see here the historic trend, we are growing. And this is important, of course, because it has an impact on species. So for example, let's go up again and put another indicator, which is interest for nocturnal birds. It's the light pollution. So we can see here, this area is super enlightened, which means nocturnal birds cannot fly over here during the night, causing fragmentation of habitats. If we also go to another side, which is the Gigafactory in Berlin, which is the Tesla factory, I'll put in English as well here, we can see, for example, the ground temperature. What is that? It estimates the heat island. So you can see here it's very red compared to the other side outside, let's say the control area, which has a very strong impact on microclimate for this area. So let's go back here to our site. And let's go back for a second to the MSA, which was the indicator that we were showing before. We are able to put it here in the map, but not just here, also in a panel below that I'm going to show you to you. Here you are. So the monitoring, the KPIs, in this case, mean species abundance from land use. This panel is important because it gives us an idea of how we are impacting and how the control area is doing in terms of mean species abundance. So what do we see here? We see that inside the site, we have a very low percentage point compared to the, let's say, integrated MSA, which would be 100. And the control area is not doing quite well as well. What does it mean in terms of animal species and plant species? It means that we almost lost all species of animals and all species of plants for this kind of site. So where do we start? We were saying before that with the matrix above, we are able to prioritize our sites and start to do some regeneration, let's say, activities, for example. So the first objective we can, let's say, aim to, it's the objective match neighbor, which it's very simple. Its objective is to equalize the MSA of the control area, which would be, of course, 21.8. If we are more ambitious, of course, another objective would be the Global Biodiversity Framework, which would be restore 30% of the area inside our site. And another objective would be the Alfred by Wilson, which consists in regenerate half of the area. And the, let's say, most impossible one would be the net zero, so restore all the area. But how do we start doing this? So if we go up, we can see here for the land cover that the surface has some cement, some artificial areas, but also some green areas. In the green areas, for example, we could start reducing the mowing, so let the spontaneous herbs grow, or we can start, for example, to build biodiversity oases around. For example, in this area here, we have some fields where we could put an oasis, which would be an area, let's say, untouched by human. Or another action would be by biodiversity credits, or there are different kind of actions that we can start. Also regarding what we are interested in which impacts, risk, and dependence we are interested in. So as you saw, the platform is very wide. We have some area that I don't have time to dive deep into. But if you have any questions also on other parts of the platform, we are here also to answer. And that's all for my side.
Okay, thank you, Lucrezia. So I would like to invite you to this webinar we're gonna have on the 4th of February. It's gonna focus on the agri-food supply chain. So it's very sector specific. We're gonna look at the impacts, the dependencies, the risk and opportunities on this sector, and of course we're gonna look at the materiality of the sector. So if you wanna join, you can scan the QR code and you can register. Of course, at the end of this webinar, you're gonna receive the YouTube link, so you can also rewatch the webinar, the slides, and all the linked useful link, for example, to register for our next webinar. So now I would like to. This is also our. Those are also our contacts. If you want to book a demo with Lucrezia, with the platform that she just shown, you can book a demo with the QR code. I would like now to invite to the stage all our speakers. We received a question direct to Julia, actually. So, but all the other speakers, if you wanna also add something at the end of the question, you can also do it, no problem. So they're asking, it is possible that the reason companies are so distant from biodiversity is because there is no personal culture, not just corporate, regarding the world we inhabit. Perhaps we should consider evaluating during job interviews how attentive people are to nature.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think that's one of many potential reasons why companies don't prioritize nature. I don't think it's necessarily the number one reason, but you absolutely need to have internal buy-in to create that sort of internal pressure. And in some cases, that can lead to changes in the company in their own sustainability strategies. So I think companies should definitely pay more attention to the mindset of the people they're hiring, but also any kinds of cultural events that they are engaging in, or how the company is speaking about these topics in general, and if they're discussing these with their employees. So I think that there's a lot that companies can do to raise the internal buy-in, but we also need to have other factors in mind, such as looking at how much money does the company have to afford, expanding their sustainability strategy. Also looking at the political climate, the regulatory climate. So it's not so simple as that, but that's one of the key elements for sure.
Thank you. Maybe Sarah or Gila, do you wanna add something? So is it a cultural problem, the one on nature?
Yeah, I think the reason companies are so distant from biodiversity, a bit of a contrarian take, is that just biodiversity is not a factor for most business bottom lines, or at least they don't think so, right? And so as a result, like companies, like they're, maybe this is a very American thing, but companies are expected to think about their bottom line, right? We're hoping more and more companies go beyond it, but at the end of the day, especially in downturns, the CFO decides, not the CMO and not the CSO or any of that kind of stuff. And I think the mentality, especially given the political winds of the time in the States and Europe and everywhere else, frankly, is that we need to find as many must-have cases. Now, everyone could say, but nature's clearly a must-have, but it's not. It's not clearly a must-have, even though we know it's a must-have. And so rather than look at biodiversity perhaps as the indicator, we should perhaps look at it as the apex, which is made up of a matrix of things that maybe companies at this point care about more, like soil, like water, like carbon, And then if, again, going back to the concept of the planetary boundaries, right? Planetary health is a mix of all these things. My hope, in a way, is that with the political winds the way they are, climate is very politicized. Climate is also very narrow. If you think about nature rather than climate, Republicans like nature, and frankly, we could use a lot more funding on other things like biodiversity and all the rest. And so I think we need to be a little more flexible with kind of like the wins, and we got to focus on the must-haves. And this is the advice we give every single nature tech startup, like also in blockchain and also in other technologies. If you're not a must-have, it's going to be really tough for you to make it.
Thank you. Sarah, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I fully agree with both of them. And as I was mentioning before, I guess it's a matter of learning to speak a language that we're not used at, because we tend to think of nature as something very different from business related. So what the job of, for example, us consultants is in this situation is to act as translators. So to really be the trait d'union between those very technicians and people that do not speak this language, but to make them understand that it's time now to start acting on nature and biodiversity.
Thank you. I think there's also a question for Lucrezia. So they're asking us with the platform, I think, how are you answering sustainability of protected areas in the long term?
Yeah, of course. So what we do when we start to assess biodiversity for a site is to go back in history and see the trend during, let's say, long-term trend from the past. And also we're starting also to integrate with projections in the future. So I would say to ensure long-term sustainability, we need very accurate data, which are also based not just on just one database, but it's also an integration of more than one database. And also what we do to ensure sustainability during time, it's also to confront and to have some benchmark. And what the way we do it, it's also to by installing some sensors in order to have not just the data, but also the data of our sensor installed in the ground. In this way, we can ensure that we have like a comparison between what the database says and what the sensor says. And just a little, let's say, point, when we're talking about sustainability, of course, we're not just talking about biodiversity, nature, and so on. We're talking about the all, let's say, ESG factors. And what we would like to emphasize here is that to ensure sustainability, we can also integrate the community, increase engagement, and for example, I was talking before with I was talking to let's say strategies to increase biodiversity and to increase the MSA for a site. We do that with biodiversity oases, which are areas, let's say, guided by grower that are people who decided to put an area of their, let's say, field and leave it completely inalterated by human activities. So this engagement with local communities could be also a way to ensure sustainability in the long term, I would say.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you to all our speakers. Actually, I was taking notes because we have attendees from all over the world, from Kenya, Spain, Ireland, Mexico, UK, Burkina Faso. So thank you for our attendees. It was really a pleasure. And see you in our next webinar. There's going to be the 4th of February, very focused on agri-food supply chain. So if you wanna follow us, register. Thank you so much.